Hello, my name is Kelly Summers, and I'm here with you to learn about US Census records. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And this should work. Okay, let's begin. Maybe. There we go. Okay, in this presentation, I'm going to give you an introduction or an overview of US Census records. We'll talk briefly about laws that pertain to the census, history. We'll talk about the census taker or the census enumerator. We will talk about who provided the information. We will look at samples of census records from every year that the census is available online. We will talk about where you can find these census records online. And then we will look at some of the non-population schedules that have genealogical value to us. We will mention some search strategies, and then I will end with a case study using census records. So come join me on this adventure. Okay, what is the census? If I were here in person with you, I would ask you to respond to this question, but what I'd like you to do is just think about it. Many of you may have some experience with census. Maybe you have filled out census records or census forms for your family in recent years. And maybe some of you have used the census for the purpose of genealogical research. In fact, that's probably one of the most common records used for genealogical research are the census records. And think about, what is the purpose? These census records are collected by the government, and they contain information about the population. And who's counted? Well, that's an interesting question, and you might assume that everyone is counted. However, there were certain populations that were excluded from being counted during these census years. So with regard to the purpose of the census, there are multiple reasons why the census exists. The number one reason is that it is required by law that the census be taken every 10 years. Other information that the government wanted to extract from the census were population count, statistical information, demographic information. Early on, it especially had to do with tax collection purposes and military purposes, trying to figure out, especially having come out of the Revolutionary War, but trying to figure out how many men do we have eligible and able to participate in a military conflict if needed. And then finally, an important one that we see often in modern days is representation. Okay, so the history of the US Census. In the United States, the first census that was gathered was in 1790. And then every 10 years after that time, the census has been taken. So you could say it's on the zero. So 1790, 1800, 1810, 1820, and so forth. And as I mentioned before, this record is one of the most popular records used for genealogical research. And one of the reasons it's most popular is because it usually contains a family unit or family structure. And so we can see a family together, and that really helps us. On the first year the census was taken in 1790, there were 6 questions asked. And then over the years, more questions were asked. Some things to take note of before we begin and before you begin your own census research is that there are some census records that are missing. In the US, for that first year, 1790, The states of Delaware, Georgia, Kentucky, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia are not available. So if you have ancestors living in those states, it doesn't matter how long you search for the 1790 census for those states, you will not find them. They happen to be burned in the War of 1812. And actually, that's true for the 1800 and 1810 census. Both those years for Georgia, both those years for New Jersey, and then 1800 for Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, and Ohio and Tennessee for 1810. So if you have ancestors living in those locations during those years, you will need to seek out what we call census substitutes. I'm not going to talk about those today, but I just want you to be aware so you're not wasting time looking for records that are not going to be found. 1820 also has the New Jersey state missing. And then for all states, the 1890 census was destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1921. So there were some fragments that survived. However, in general, we know that in 1890, we won't find a census for our families. Okay, I have some census years here in two columns. The first column starts with 1790 and goes to 1840. The second column goes from 1850 to 1950. The first column represents the first style of census taken. During the years of 1790 to 1840, the only names that appear on these census records are the name of the head of household. So typically that will be the father in the family or the husband of the family. Otherwise, if the father had died or the husband had died, then the widow would appear as the head of household. And then everyone else on those years is represented by tally marks. So if you're searching for an ancestor that would have been a child during the years of 1790 to 1840, you need to search for his father's name or whoever was the head of household at that time. Beginning in 1850 and on down to 1950, we have the names of every person in the household listed. So you can search any name for anyone in the family and they should appear during those years. Okay, let's talk about our census taker, otherwise called a census enumerator. Now imagine what the population looked like in 1790. The country was very rural, and even those places that were big cities and big towns, to our standards now, were really quite small. And when it was time to take the census or gather and collect this information, these census takers were assigned an area within the county or the township to go visit during a certain period of time. They may have had a week or a little longer or a little less to cover an area that they were assigned. In that time, especially the early days, their mode of travel would have been walking. They might have had a horse or a donkey, but there were no cars, no scooters, nothing to get around quickly. And many of the people outside of the towns lived in very rurally. So you might have a house that is, their nearest neighbors are a mile away or more. So imagine that. This census taker, he was assigned to go identify all the people in his area, and he needed to do that within that time frame. So he has to decide how to get there and make sure that he gets to everyone during that time. Now, when these people were hired to be census takers, nobody gave them a test and asked, can we see your penmanship first? Can we see how well you write? That was not anything they had to answer. Nobody asked about their education. Early on, they were paid per name. And what happens, imagine this, what happens if a census taker comes to somebody that is an immigrant and doesn't even speak the language. So there were some obstacles that this census enumerator would face. In this picture that I have here showing, you can see a log cabin, and you have family members gathered around, and the census taker or census enumerator is sitting on the ground, and he has opened a book. And this is a rather large book, but this is a book where he's going to respond to the questions. He's actually going to take your answers to the questions, whoever you visited, and he's going to record them in his book. Now think at this time, how is he doing this? He actually is going to have an ink well and a quill pen, and he's got to travel around with this. And what happens when the weather gets bad? If it rains or if it snows? Anyway, he's got to face all of these things as he is gathering this information. Okay, here's another thought. What happens if he goes to every house and he gets to one and nobody's home? He still has more people to visit, but nobody's home at this house. Well, he can return again, or if he's in a hurry and he has a lot more people to see, he might ask the neighbors, do you know who lives here? What their names are and how old they are? Or maybe he'll ask the farmhands, somebody that's working in the field, or children that are nearby. So this might help you to understand why sometimes the information that we gather or that we see on the census records is maybe off a little, different than we would expect it to be. And then what if we do find the family is home? I often think if it were my family, I have lots of children, and I was even there when each of them were born, but sometimes I forget some of the details. And so it all depends on who answered the questions. Maybe mom knows all the answers best, but maybe dad responded to the questions, or maybe it was a grandparent or one of the kids. So even if you do get the right family and ask the right questions, the answers might be off a little bit. And so one of the rules that I use when I do census research is that if the age of people are within 5 years of each other, of what I'm counting, for example, if I find 3 or 4 different census records and I make some comparisons, identifying the same person in each census record, if their age is off a little bit, I don't worry too much. In fact, I feel very comfortable and confident if it is within a 5-year range. The only time I would have a problem with that is if I'm looking at a child. I expect that the age for children is going to be pretty accurate because a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old look very different. And so usually the most accurate age for children will be when they're young. But when people are older, sometimes they round their age up to the nearest decade. They didn't have a reason to pull out their birth certificate to get a driver's license and such. So they didn't celebrate birthdays the same way we do now. They didn't have documentation all the time available with regard to their birth. So they might have rounded it up as adults. It wasn't a big thing, but that will help you understand why there might be some differences as you find these. Okay, let's go ahead and look at some different census. The first census in 1790, we have 6 questions that were asked, and these are the questions. The first one is, what is the name of the head of household? And usually that will be a man. Then what is the number of free white males under 16 in the family? The number of free white males 16 and over in the family? The number of free white females in the family? Number of all other free persons, and number of slaves. So those were the questions. And here is an example of a 1790 US Federal Census. Now this one happens to be printed, and you can see the crease where this is part of a book. I also want you to notice that this book had some damage. And so we have some pages that maybe they look like they might have even been burned. So sometimes you see that in these older records. So we have an entry at the top, and our first entry here is Abraham C. Grote. And we have a tally mark representing, I believe this one is males of 16 years and upwards. We have a tally mark next, free white males 16 years and under, and then free white males and females, all free people, 4, and then 2 for slaves. And so this is how you would read it. One name, and then the rest represents his household. Here's an example from 1800, and this one I think looks beautiful. I love the form that's actually printed. And here we see that they have added more columns for ages, and so there's additional questions. So let's look at John Thompson, for example. We don't have anything entered here until this area here, 3. But notice this little comment here. It says he is a free Negro. Now let's look at the one below him. Abraham Thornton has 2 males under the age of 10. And then we have blank here. And then we have one male, 16 to 26, and then nothing here. Then we go to the female side, and we have 1 female, 16 to 26, and then nothing more. So this structure represents Abraham's household. Abraham likely falls into this age bracket. This tally mark probably represents him. He is somewhere between the age of 16 to 26. And this probably represents his wife, who is of the same age range. And then these are probably their 2 younger children. So that's how you would read this document. A lot of people feel like this kind of information is not very valuable. But as I just pointed out, we just saw the family structure by looking at those tally marks. So even though we don't have the names of other family members, we can identify which tally mark is the head of household, which one is likely his wife, and then the others likely represent children. Okay, the next year, 1810, this census happens to be created by the census enumerator himself. It's not a printed form. And I just wanted to let you know that sometimes every time, usually, when the census taker creates the census list here, he puts columns and he knows what the columns represent. So you don't usually see the headings at the top, but he knows what the headings are. And then he asks the questions and fills them in. And in this particular one, so let's look at John Van Dyke. There are 2, this would represent males of a young age. And then we have another male here, which again probably represents John. And then usually you'll find a double line, just like we see right here. And then the females will begin. So there's a young female, and this one probably represents John Van Dyke's wife. And then the rest are left blank. I did want to point out on this one, we have a woman here, and rather than giving her first name in this instance, they have written Widow Tripp. And it looks like we have 3 very young men, males, another one and another one here. And if we go all the way over here to the female side, this probably represents Widow Tripp herself. Okay, let's go ahead and look at 1820. You can see again, this one has more columns. And what they've done when they've added more columns is every year they've decided they want to know more specific information about the ages. And so at the top on this one, I actually just put a kind of legend of what each of the columns mean there. So first we begin with the males, and then we begin with the females. And that's how it is listed here. Okay, so let's look at Gilbert Lane right here. He has 3. This would represent 3 males to the age of 10. Then we have 1, and that would be a male 10 to 16. And then we have these 2 little kind of dots, kind of backwards commas. And this is how the census enumerator is just indicating that it's blank. He's trying to keep that row straight. And so he's just indicating there's not a number there. And not in the next one. So that was 16 to 18, and then 16 to 26. And 26 to 45, Gilbert is going to fit here. And then we have some blank ones, and then we have another one over here, and that will probably represent his wife. So that's how you would read this. I typically see that double line between the males and females, and I suspect that one is right here, but he didn't, this particular census taker did not create that double line. Okay, here we have another one, 1830, and again, it's very nice. We've got a printed one, very easy to read. And now we're doing kind of 5-year categories till we get to 20, and then we go 10 years. So James Whitefield appears to have a male in the household between the ages of 5 to 10, another one 15 to 20, and then James is probably represented in this one 50 to 60. If we continue on, the females, there's a female 10 to 15, another 15 to 20, and then another one 40 to 50. That's probably his wife. Excuse me. Okay, 1840 census. And you can see here we have similar, more columns again. We have the males here. This whole section includes free white persons, females, and then we have free colored persons over here. So let's go to the second entry here. We have John Enley, and we have a male under the age of 5. We have, it looks like 3 there that are between 10 and 15. And then I don't see anyone here. Then we have 1 under the age of 5, a female from 5 to 10, another one 30 to 40. And this is interesting. They had one 60 to 70, but it looks like they crossed it out. So sometimes I do think sometimes it's hard to follow that line and get the right numbers there. Additionally, sometimes there are notations in the side. Sometimes it will mention, in this case, it does a township or a neighborhood, and you might get some additional information there. Okay, 1850. 1850 is the very first year we now have every name listed. And there are some important things I wanted to point out about the questions they're answering now. So this first line, we have a person that looks like a Malcolm McPherson. It asks his age. He's 39. He's a male. He is a farmer. This is the occupation place. And then the question was asked, the value of your real estate. This refers to your real estate, your property. And it is self-reported. And he said he had $2,800 of real estate. His place of birth will be the state or country he was born in. And in this case, he was born in Ohio. Then there are some other interesting questions. Column 10 asks if they were married that year. If they were, there will be a line in that column. It asks about their education. And then persons 20 years of age or older who cannot read or write. So that's kind of interesting. It was not that uncommon to early on not be able to read and write. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the next line here. we have Mary, and then we have a ditto mark. We are going to assume that the ditto marks for all the rest of the people in this household, this represents a household, that they all have the same last name. So we have Mary, who's 31, female, born in Ohio. We have Elizabeth, who is 8, female, born in Ohio. We have Janet, who is 6, female, born in Ohio. And it looks like Anne, maybe 4. Oh, maybe not, because this is a male. That might be an abbreviation for another name. We would want to find that person on another census to confirm what the name is. And then we have another one here that looks like it's an infant. And it says 6/12. This 6/12 represents that the child is not yet a year. This child is 6 months at the time, and female and born in Ohio. I'd like to draw your attention to the top of the page. This census from 1850 forward records the day that that family was visited. So this records the 8th day of October, 1850. So we know that on that day, this child was about 6 months old. And then this represents the ages of those people at that time. Let's go ahead now and see the next year, which would be 1860. 1860 looks very similar to the last year that we saw, but they have added a couple more things. So let's start with this household. These numbers on the side represent dwelling number and then family number. Sometimes you have more than one family living in the same household, but in this case, we've got one family here in this house. So it begins with probably Jacob. It looks like we have, or Joel, maybe that's Joel. McCormick, who is 40, and he's male, he's a farmer. And now we've asked not just the value of your real estate, but we have value of real estate first. He says $1,000. And then we have value of personal estate, which is $600. And then his place of birth. Again, married within the year, we can see that the family above has a married couple that married within the year. Attended school, and persons who cannot read or write. So if we continue on with this household, we have Malaya, and again, we have those ditto marks, which would indicate probably the same last name. 38, female, and where she was born, it looks like Tennessee. We have John, 20, born in Indiana. We have Jackson, 11, ditto mark. And we have Eli, 10, ditto mark. And Milton, 2, ditto mark. So that just gives us an idea of where each of these people were born. Now, we are making an assumption that this represents a family. And since we have 2 adults, a male and female, with some children, that's probably a pretty good assumption. But this particular census record doesn't clearly tell us the relationship of the people in the household. But we typically assume that this is a family. Now, looking at the birthplaces of the children and the family members, we can usually see a migration pattern, where they've been and where they were before. And so that's something to pay attention to. Here we have 1870. Again, we see families here. Again, our number of dwelling and household. And here we start at the top. B.H. Spears. And the age is 52. And it looks like a female. She is keeping house. The value of the real estate is 200. Value of personal estate is 500. She was born in New York. And then here we have some new questions this year. The parentage. They want to know if your father or mother was born outside the country. And in this case, she responded that her father was born outside the country. Again, we have the cannot read or write. And then over here, column 19, we have US citizens over the age of 21. So again, continuing in this family, we have John D., who is 14 and works on farm, born in Ohio. We have Jenny, 12, female, attended school. And it originally said Denmark, but it was crossed out and Ohio was recorded. And both of these two attended school. Then we have other households, and we can see this is in an area where we have some people who were born in Denmark and Norway, and then later we have some who were born within the United States. Again, pay attention to the date at the top. This one, it was the 20th day of July, 1870. 1880 was a fun census year. One of the big things that I like about this one is that it now tells you the relationship of everyone in the household. And the relationship is listed as it pertains to the head of household, meaning, how are you connected to the head of household? So let's look at this first one. George G. Woodford. It looks like he's about 45, and there's nothing here. Sometimes you might see head in there. And here we have his occupation and his birthplace. He was born in New York, and then this has also been added. His father was born in New York, and his mother was born in New York. Now, let's look at the next line. On this particular census here for this particular place, the census taker has put a line indicating that this next person has the same last name as the one above. So this is Olive E. Woodford, female, 45, and she is the wife. She is a wife to George. She's keeping house, and then all these ditto marks mean that she was born in New York, and so were her parents. Next, we have Charles R., who is 18, and it clearly says he is a son. He is single, where his parents are married. And his occupation, and again, ditto marks for where he was born and his parents. Next, we have Susie, who is 10, and a daughter. And again, similar information. So it's really nice to have this, because sometimes one of the things the census taker was told to do was record everyone who is in the household. So maybe we have a cousin visiting, or a nephew, some other relation, or a neighbor, and this would indicate their relationship. If we look further on this page, we see that here we have a son-in-law and his wife, and we have a ward, and we have somebody that is the help that's being paid to help with the housework or other labor. Okay, 1890 census. This is a pretty devastating picture. The 1890 census, we mentioned it once before, was destroyed completely. Well, I say completely. However, there are some small fragments from some states, but there is nothing complete. I have seen some of the pages, and even the pages that survived are pretty damaged. So it is assumed that typically you will not be able to find 18 census records. And so you will have to span 20 years from 1880 to 1900 in your census research. 1900 is a great year for census records. Not only does it have the specific date, here we have the 1st of June, 1900. We have additional columns here. We have information again on the relationship of everyone in the household. And this is the only year that I have found where they ask not only your age, but they ask you what month and year you were born, in addition to your age. So very valuable here. Here we have this first person, Hiltzerman. He's the head of household. He was born April 1853, and he's 47. Now the M here indicates that he's married. And it says number of years married. And isn't this interesting? 0. So the wife here is was born in November 1851 or 9, and she is 40, and she's been married 0 years. So likely, it appears that these two recently married. But we have some other children here in the household that probably came from a prior marriage. If we look for the mother here, oh, whoops. Just a minute. Let me go back. Every entry will indicate for a woman who's married how many children she's given birth to and how many are still living. And it says that this woman has given birth to 8 children and 8 are still living. So this is very valuable. She was born in Germany, her parents born in Germany. Now we have this citizenship column here. This is great for if you have immigrant ancestors that asks, what year did you arrive? How many years have you been here? And have you become a naturalized citizen? In this case, it says no. But if we come down to this one down here, the NA represents that, yes, this person has been naturalized. And then we have the occupation over here. So this is a great one. Here's an example over here. They've been married 47 years. Okay, 1910 census, they kept some of the columns and then they took away the column that had the month and the year of birth. So here we have Charles Haley, who is the head of the family. He's 40 and it says M1. M1 indicates that this is his first marriage. He's been married 11 years. Cora M is his wife. She's 30. M1, her first marriage. They've been married 11 years. She has given birth to 2 children and 2 are still living. She was born in Iowa, her father in Indiana, and her mother in the US. And they speak English. So that is what the 1910 looks like. 1920, they've decided to ask a question about ownership of your home. So we have a household here. We have the relationships where we have head, wife, son, son, daughter. And then the O here represents, do you own or rent your home? In this case, O is for owning it. The M that follows means they have a mortgage on it, so they make payments. Then we have gender, we have race, and this particular census, I believe, is from Hawaii. So we have a lot of people from different places. Here we have a Japanese, and we have, I believe, some Portuguese. It gives their age, it gives whether they're married or single, when they arrived, we're in the citizenship column here, and whether they've become a citizen. NA means they are naturalized citizen. If we look below here, we have AL. That means that they are an alien. They are not a citizen and they have not started the process to become a citizen. Then we have where this person was born, where their father was born, and where their mother was born, and the occupation. And this one also asks what languages are spoken. So lots of fun stuff. Here we have the 1930 Federal Census, and this one is San Francisco. We have, again, households, and they're asking, do you own or rent? And they're asking how much you pay for rent. And then we have gender, we have color or race, we have age, we have, here they're asking for your marital condition, married, single, and age at first marriage. Then we have place of birth, father's place of birth, mother's place of birth. And then we have occupation. And this particular page, it looks like we have a lot of sailors. And we do have that citizenship column again. Citizenship, that will lead you into other records like naturalization records. Here we have the 1940 census. Again, similar questions. Ownership is one of the first ones. If you own, they're asking the value of your home. We have relationships for everyone in the household, a gender, race, ages, their marital status, and then they're asking about education, the place of birth. And then this one asks, where were you living 5 years ago? So it would be, where were you living in 1935? So many times it's the same house. Sometimes it gives you a different location. Then we have some other questions and occupation here. The 1950 census, which is the last census that we have available to us right now online. Again, similar questions. This one is laid out in a similar format. We have household, relationship, race, gender, age, and birthplace, and occupation over here. Okay, so to quickly go over what we talked about, we looked at census records from 1790 to 1950. They are maintained every 10 years until presently. However, they're not made available to the public until after 72 years. So we only have them available to 1950. The 1890 census was destroyed. From 1850 through 1950, we have the names and ages of everyone in the household. From 1880 through 1950, we have the relationships of everyone in the household. In 1900 is the only year that also includes the birth month and the birth year of everyone in the census. And 1900 to 1930, actually, I would say it goes even beyond that, where you will have immigration year, what year you arrived, and whether or not you're a naturalized citizen. Okay, so for those early census records, sometimes it's hard to know what the columns are at the top. And if you go to familysearch.org under search and research wiki, you can search for the US Census headings, and it will show you what the headings represent, what each column represents. So that might be a useful tool for you. Okay, as we do census research, you should find the census record for every year your ancestor would have been alive during the census. And I suggest starting from the most recent in time and going backwards. So when your ancestor was the oldest, right at or near his death, and then go back in time till he was a child. Places where you can find census records online, familysearch.org, ancestry.com, and that's a subscription website, findmypast.com, and then there are many, many others that have census records online. Yeah, and just a reminder that Family Search, you are required to have a login, but they do give you access for free to all of their collections. Okay, well, you may have thought that we talked about everything there was to talk about with regard to census records. However, there are some additional census schedules. And these census schedules are what you might call non-population schedules. But they have information that could be helpful in doing your research. The agricultural schedule, this would be specific to farmers and ask questions about their property, how many acres they own, what they farm, and the animals they have. There is an Indian census, and I do have an example of that for you. There's a manufacturing census. So if there was a factory, they collect information about the factory. Mortality schedules, I love these. This gives information about deaths between the census years. Slave schedules, those were only available for 2 years, 1850 and 1860. There are statistical non-population schedules. There are territorial census records. These records many times look very similar to the federal census. However, they may be taken at years in different intervals. It was common for a territory to take a census right before it became a state. And so that's an interesting little thing. And then there's the veterans schedule that is available in 1890. And that's interesting because the 1890 census was destroyed, but the veterans schedule is something that we have that we can use for that year. So let's look at some of these. Here I have a mortality schedule. Now, when the census enumerator asked the questions about the family, once he was done with that, he then opened a second book and asked a question, and was the question: did anyone in your family die in the last year? If so, he wrote that information down. So you can see here, every line is a new entry of somebody that died the year prior to the census. So we have Gertrude Clow. She was 10 months and female, white, born in Minnesota, mother in New Hampshire, father in Maine, and she died in July of cholera. So if we went to another line, again, James was 53. He was married, born in New York, father in Ireland, mother in Ireland. Then we have his occupation. The month he died was February, and pneumonia. And then I think this one was how many years had he been here in this location. So this was taken 1850, 1860, 1870, and 1880. You have a good chance. I would always encourage you to search these because you might find that you have a family member that died the year prior to the census, and this is as good as a death certificate if you find them in this. Here is the 1890 Veterans Schedule. And in 1890, we're looking at the veterans of the Civil War. So any veteran of the Civil War that is still living in 1890 was recorded here. I find this information fascinating. So we have William H. Bulla. He was a second lieutenant in Company F in the 2nd Infantry, or the 2nd Cavalry. And then we have a date that he enlisted. We have the date of discharge and the total length of his service, 3 years, 6 months, and 6 days. With this information, you can then get into military records and find out more about his service. Now, something I did want to point out is it has this bottom portion that has a corresponding number. So 1 and 1 down here. This is the post office, Empire Prairie, but it gives a note here. Usually it gives a note about an injury that was that he received during his service. However, in this one, it says that he was held as a prisoner of war at Andersonville for 4 months. So an interesting little fact that, again, if this were your ancestor, you probably want to find out about it. Okay, another non-population schedule. Let me see what this is. Okay, so this is an agricultural schedule. If your ancestor was listed as a farmer, they're probably going to be found in this. And so every line is a new entry. We have information about how much property they own. We have, in this case, John Henderson, this first entry has 7 horses, 7 milk cows, and then 15 other cattle. We have 20 sheep, 8 swine, and the value of all his livestock. If we keep going, they're asking about what he's growing. He was growing 90 acres of spring wheat. Over here, it looks like we have 1,000 acres of Indian corn, or not acres, these are bushels, sorry about that, and oats, 700 here. So this doesn't give us genealogical information. However, it may give you an idea of your ancestors' economic standing. And it's kind of fun to see what kinds of things they owned and what kind of farm they might have had. Okay, here I have, there were 2 years, 1850 and 1860, that slave schedules were taken. And this looks similar to an 1850 or 1860 census entry. However, we have half the page is all that is used for the information. And names of slave owners are put in column 1. So this entry here, we have Leary, Clifton Leary, who has one slave, the age of 12, female and Black. And then the next entry is here and so forth. So we don't have the names themselves, but there are other records where you can find the names. I would suggest that it's really important that you research out the 1850 and 1860 slave schedules. If your ancestors owned slaves, or if your ancestors were slaves, you need to research the slaves as well as the owner in order to find complete information. And so that has to be done together. And a lot of people I know get frustrated about researching ancestors that were slaves because there aren't very many records. However, it is possible to uniquely identify slaves. It is difficult, but it is possible to do. Other schedules that were taken. This is the US Indian Census schedule, and they were taken 1885 to 1940. Interesting little fact, Indians or Native Americans were not considered citizens in the United States until I think it was 1942. So they will be recorded separately, not in the regular population schedules that we saw. And again, you can see similar information. We have their name. In this case, some of them have English names and their relationships to the people in the household, ages, gender, and so forth. Okay, so that is a lot of information. Again, I would suggest search for your ancestor in every census they would be alive. Now I have a case study to show you an example of how this works. And while we're looking at this example, you'll get some ideas about strategies and difficulties you might face as you're researching. So this is a great-great-grandfather, and his name is Jacob Youngman, and he died. The information I had was that he was born in Kentucky in the 1820s, and he died in 1901 in Missouri. So knowing when he died, I will begin looking in the 1900 census in Missouri for him. And I've chosen this ancestor because he has a unique last name, and we want to be able to uniquely identify everyone. And I just thought for a case study purpose, it would be a fun one. Okay, so here I have the 1900 census, and in Butler Township, Harrison County, Missouri, Jacob was found. And here's his entry here, Jacob Youngman, the head of household. It says he was born August 1825 and that he is 74 years old. He is married, and he's been married for 36 years. He was born in Kentucky, and both of his parents were born in Kentucky. His wife, her name is Rachel. She was born in June 1843, and she's 56. Now, you can see that the age difference there is pretty large. So I would suggest that with this kind of gap in age difference, that you probably have, this is probably a second marriage for Jacob, especially seeing that they've been married for 36 years. For Rachel, that would make her 20 when they got married, but Jacob would have been much older. And if we continue here, it says that they were married 36 years, that Rachel has given birth to 9 children, and 7 of them are alive in 1900. She was born in Virginia, and her parents were born in Virginia. Next, we have Stacy G., who is a son, born October 1869. He's 30 years old, and he's single, born in Missouri. And then this helps us, especially when we're dealing with multiple marriages. This next column, where the dad was born, should we want it to represent our dad here, Kentucky, which it does, and then Virginia, which represents the mom. We just always want to double check that. Then we have Irvin Yu, who is a son. He was born in April 1879, 21 years old, single, again, Missouri. And over here it tells us he's a teacher. William, who is 18, born in September 1881, single. He is a farm laborer and born in Missouri. Katie P., daughter, and she was born in January 1884. She's 16 and single. So of the 9 children, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 right here, right now. So we know we need to reconstruct this family and find the rest of the children. So going back in time, our census going back 10 years back would take us to 1890, which unfortunately is not going to be available. But if we go back to 1880, we should see Irvin and Stacy in that census. So let's go back. Oh, yes, here, good. We want to see this. This is the information that we gathered from that particular 1900 census. And I've color-coded it blue because I want you to see what we learned from each new document. So they said they had been married, I think it was about 36 years. So that means that they were married about 1864. We are looking for 9 children. 7 are alive in 1900, and we have birth months and birth years for these children. Okay, 1890, the census was destroyed. So we're going to go to the year before that, which is actually 20 years from 1900. And here I have some interesting images here. Here's the top of the page. We're in Butler Township, Harrison County, Missouri, which was the same place we were in 1900. Then this next image in the middle represents the bottom of the page. They were found at the very bottom of the page. And then the last little image here is the very top of the next page. Sometimes you'll find a family, but it isn't complete on one page. So you may have to go to the next image to see it. So let's look at this one. Jacob Youngman is 54. He is a farmer. Again, born in Kentucky. That lines up with what we know. Rachel, 35. She's his wife, born in Virginia. Very good. Now, next I see Nellie, who is 15. Harry, who is 12. Stacy, I have seen before. He's 10. Charles, who is 8. Jacob O., who is 6. Ed Ellsworth, who is 3. And Irvin, who is 1. So we have some new names here. And if we look at the birthplaces, Nellie was born in Iowa, and the rest of the children were born in Missouri. This shows us a migration history. So we can see they've been in Missouri for at least 12 years, because this child's 12. And then 15 years ago, they were in Iowa. So this is going to tell us where we were going to find them again. So as we go back, here's what we've added. The 1880 census, the red is all the new information that we added to this family. And if you go ahead and count, we now have 9 children. Now, many people would think, oh, I'm done, I've got everyone. But that's not what you're going to do, because you are going to find every ancestor or every census during the life of this ancestor. So Jacob, that's who we're focusing on. And he's still alive in 1880. So we want to keep going back in time as far as we can go to find him during his life. So now we have these children. We want to go back now to 1870. And if we look, look at the birth years here. In 1870, I expect them to be living in Missouri. And so I'm going to do that search, and this is what I found. In Missouri in 1870, in a different county and township, Allen Township, Worth County, I was able to find Jacob Youngman. However, I couldn't find him by just typing in his name. This Youngman, if you look at it closely, was indexed, that first letter was indexed as a Z. So no matter how hard I searched, I could not find it. So I had to use no last name when I searched. And I said, Jacob, I want to find Jacob, who was born about 1825 in Kentucky, but living in Missouri. And then this came up. So now let's look and make sure that we have the right family. So we have Jacob, who is 45. And then we have information about his real estate and personal property. He's born in Kentucky. We have Rachel, who is 27, keeping house, born in Virginia. And then we have some children here: Elizabeth, Lewis, Alice, Mary, and Carrie. Now, the first thing I notice is that Elizabeth is 19. There is no way that Rachel could have given birth to Elizabeth, who is 19. So these children probably represent children from Jacob's first marriage. And if we look to where they were born, it says they all were born in Indiana. Okay, again, we are at the end of the page. So I would have expected to go to the next image and find the rest of the children, Rachel's children that are alive in 1870. However, I went to the next page and they weren't there. This was image 14. I went until image 25, and then I found this. Again, that same Z-looking Y. We have Nellie, who is 5, Harry, who is 3, and Stacy, who is 6 months. Nellie was born in Iowa, Harry and Stacy in Missouri, and this is exactly what we knew and already had. Okay, so we talked about two things here on this particular year that we looked. Strategies for finding the family if somebody indexed the last name incorrectly. You can search by a first name and a birth year and a birthplace. I would suggest sometimes searching by a unique child's name may help as well. And then I also, we couldn't find part of the family. So I had to go page by page until I found it. And it took about 11 images. So don't give up. I think what must have happened is that the pages stuck together. And so the census taker just filled in the pages in between, the spots in between. Okay, let's keep going. This is what we have. We didn't get anything new on Jacob and Rachel and their 9 children, but we did identify 5 other children. And we have their about birth years and their places of birth. Okay, now we go back in time another 10 years. Oh, and if I go back here, maybe I can show you this. We're going to 1860. We might, if we look at this one, and they didn't get married until about 64. So this child was born in Indiana. I would expect to maybe see the family in Indiana. Well, I wasn't able to find the family in Indiana, but I did find Jacob Youngman in Iowa. Now, again, I want to confirm that I have the right family. So Jacob Youngman, 37, farmer. He has real estate and personal, and he was born in Kentucky. Then we have Sarah. Now, this is someone I've never seen before. This looks like it is his wife. She's 38, a year older than him, and born in Tennessee. Then we see children that we saw in the last census: Elizabeth, Lewis L., Alice E., Mary V., Nancy C. All of those children are named the same except for the last one. Nancy C. was listed as Carrie in the last census. I have found this to happen often when you're doing census research, that one year someone might go by their first name and another year they might go by their middle name. So in the case of Nancy, when she was young, they called her Nancy, but by the time she was 10 or so, she was going by the name of Carrie. So if that happens, you want to see if the people fit in the structure? Are they the right age? Are they born in the right place? Are the siblings around them correct? And so what we found in the last one was Nancy C. Nancy was Carrie. Okay, the ages are Elizabeth is 9, Lewis is 7, Alice is 6, Mary is 4, and then Nancy looks like she's a couple months old. If we look at their birthplaces, Elizabeth is born in Indiana, and the other children are born in Iowa. This is different than what was on our last record. So let's go ahead and look at this a little closer. The new information we found from 1860 is the purple. So notice that we have some initials here. And this census, the 1860, says Iowa, but the 1870 said Indiana for birthplace for these children. Now, if you think about it for a minute, you can actually figure out which one is correct. Now, who is reporting this information? Who is likely reporting this information in the 1860? Probably mom, who is there. In the 1870, we have a stepmother who was not there that may have reported Indiana. Maybe she knew they lived in Indiana and just assumed that they were born in Indiana. So if I were to make a choice here and decide, I would decide that for these children, they were likely born in Iowa, not Indiana, as stated in the census record prior. Now, let's go back to this. There are a couple things I wanted to point out. Okay, one thing here is always look at who the neighbors are and who's living next to them. Very often you have family members living close by. Now, I happen to know because I later found the marriage record for Jacob and Sarah's maiden name is Marks. And look who we have living next door, William Marks. This is Sarah's brother. Very common to have something like that, but I might not notice that when I initially do the research. So look around, and if I look around, you just may find some other interesting things. Okay, the next thing I want to point out here in the 1860 census is we have other people living in Jacob Youngman's household. We have Jacob Cart and Rachel Cart, and here it says they are twins. They are 17 and they are both born in Virginia. Now, think about this for a minute. Why do we have people that aren't family members living in the household? Well, we see up here that Jacob has over $4,000 worth of property. He's a farmer. He has a lot of farm work to do. I bet you that this Jacob Cart is a farmhand, and he's probably hired to help on the farm. And I wouldn't be surprised if Rachel was there to help with the children. I think that's probably very common. Now, if you look at this a little more closely and you remember what we have found on past census years, you might wonder, is this the Rachel that Jacob marries later? Now, Jacob married a second time about 1864. So about 4 years later than this. It is possible that Sarah died, maybe in childbirth or some other sickness or other reason, and leaving all of these young children, Jacob needed to find a way to provide for them and somebody to care for them. And it would have made logical sense that he married the person that was already caring for them. And I know for many of my students, this seems, how could you marry not for love? At this time, people did not marry necessarily for love. It was more out of survival, and they made their choices that way. So it's not that unusual for this time. I can see how it would have made a lot of sense that Rachel just step into that role at that point. Okay, let's continue. Now, this is what we found. So we have Sarah, who was born about 1822 in Tennessee. Interesting, Jacob Youngman, throughout all these census records, he has an age range or year range of when he was born, anywhere between 1826 and 23. And I find it interesting that in this last census, he was a year younger than his wife. And then in the other census, he was quite a bit older than his wife, and his age kind of changed maybe according to who he was married to. But again, it's within the 5-year range. And so I feel pretty comfortable with that. It's great if we have it right on a certain year, but that's not always the way it happens. Okay, so we want to go back again 10 years to 1850, and we don't even know if they were married in 1850. But let's go to Indiana and see what we can find. And I went to 1850 in Van Buren Township, Shelby County, Indiana. And this is what I found. Jacob Youngman, who is 27, and this time he's a cabinet maker. Now, this is a little bit unusual. He was a farmer in all of the other census. However, this time we have him listed as a cabinet maker. He is born in Kentucky. Now, that might make a question of whether it really is him or not. We have Sarah, who is 28, a year older than him. She says she's born in Virginia. Now, on the last census, she said she was born in Tennessee. How do we bring that together to make sense? Well, here is an idea. Let's say she was born in Virginia, but in 1860, they asked her where she was born, and she said something like, I was born in Virginia, but the place I was born in is now Tennessee. That could make sense because Virginia, part of Virginia, became Tennessee. And so they both could really be right. Okay, then we have a child here who is 1 year old, Leonidas. He's born in Indiana. This child we've never seen again. Likely this child died when he was young. So let's go ahead and see what we have. 1850, we have information about a new child. We have another birthplace for Sarah, which that's probably the correct birthplace. So that's how we put that together. And then, oh, sorry about that. Let's go again. Now let's look. What do we know, having found census records from 1900 to 1850 for Jacob and his wives? We know that he married Sarah first, and they lived in Indiana and Iowa. He married Rachel second, and they lived in Iowa and Missouri. And by the time we're done, this is how much we've collected. We have some details, but we still have some information that would be nice to pinpoint. For example, we have some about years. It would be really nice to be specific. If we found some birth records, that would help us. Oh, and I wanted to mention down here for William and Katie, we've put a specific place of birth, and this is what happened. On the 1880 census and the 1900 census, that span of 20 years, the family was living in the same location, Butler Township, Harrison County, Missouri. Now, if we believe they were living there during those 20 years, we can say any child that was born during that time was born in this location. And that's what allowed us to put a very specific birthplace for those children. Unfortunately, we found them in other places in Missouri. They didn't live in the same place year after year until 1880. So the other places are just Missouri. Again, we want to get some specific information about them, and that will lead us to birth, marriage, and death records to do that. So that was the first marriage. Here is our second. Oh, actually, that was the second marriage. This is the first marriage. We can estimate when the couple probably married, which could lead us to search for marriage record about that time and that location. And yeah, we were able to reconstruct both of these families And it looks like there were 9 children from the second wife, and we have 7 children from the first marriage. So that's a rather large family. So I suggest that you go and have fun doing your own census research. There's so much to find, lots of resources out there. Don't give up if it's not straightforward. And if it doesn't look exactly right, look closer. You may find some interesting details, and maybe your ancestor was was married more than once. And maybe they went by their first name, or maybe they went by their middle name. And maybe you have to find the last name using different spellings. I find that many times a census taker would have recorded the last name phonetically. So don't get stuck that it's got to be exactly the state and exactly the spelling. Be flexible, and you'll have more success finding your ancestors. So now go try it out with census research.